Welcome to the A.D.H. Deep Dive, the show that's not about ADHD but is filled with proof it exists. My name is David J. Mund. I'm an actor, director, cinematographer, photographer, and host of the A.D.H. Deep Dive. And this week I'm joined by Frank Youngman. Frank is my former orchestra and jazz band teacher, and he's also the genius behind the Frank Youngman All-Stars. On this episode, I dedicate a good portion of time thanking Frank for the creative courage he instilled in me at such a young age. We also discuss Frank's former years as an educator, life after retirement, and the vice-like grip that imposter syndrome has on artists regardless of age. So thank you for joining this episode of the A.D.H. Deep Dive. Let's dive in, shall we? And, all right, there's no official start to the podcast. Essentially, it's just a conversation. However, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not take a quick opportunity to get some stuff off my chest that I haven't said to you in quite a long time. So the most important thing is, first of all, I appreciate you even doing this in the first place.
Sure, I thought it'd be fun.
You've always been deeply supportive of everything that I've done, and that's kind of what this little intro process may ultimately be for me. I feel like I've had a little bit of intimidation going into this conversation in that I don't think that you properly understand how highly people revere you or how much people respect you, especially like some of us that have grown up being taught by you. And so there's a bit of a like weird starstruck nature that I still have when I talk to you.
Oh, Lord.
Even though I know, I can see your head expanding right now.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't at all. I appreciate that, David, but that's the last thing you should feel.
Well, that's too damn bad. I think that just about anybody, at least in my age group, who's watching this episode or listening to this episode was probably in some way related to the band class or the jazz band class. They knew you in some regard. And Frank, you have done so much that you aren't even particularly aware of for my career in general. I think that drumming alone was my first opportunity to like feel what it was like to be inspired creatively. And when you're a kid, it's a very delicate situation in that if you do not feel properly supported, you're not going to continue, but you're not going to thrive, but B, you may not just continue at all. You may give up. Right. And to me, when I was part of your class, even though I was a rambunctious, wild child, there was never the idea that it was worth quitting. And I think it was because you were so good at making students feel like they were talented, regardless of whether that was objectively true or not.
Yeah, well.
So, and that further expands into just confidence creatively in my career, whether it's an actor or a cinematographer or a director or whatever. You were able to take kids at such a sweet spot in their life, a very delicate time in their lives. Obviously, they hop into your class around middle school, very formative years. And I just want to start by initially thanking you. I will proverbially kiss the ring for the rest of this episode because, again, not just as a friend, but I'm a deep fan of yours musically as well. So I don't know. I love you, man, and I thank you for everything that you've ever done for me. And I know that there's a lot of people listening right now who feel the exact same way as me. So,
David, thank you. You're welcome, and thank you. It's hard to express how much when a former student expresses what you mean to them. I mean, I could get real choked up when I talk about it because most of us spend our life wondering if they've made a difference.
Right.
I mean, that's sort of, and I still feel that. I mean, it's like, wow.
I'm sure.
I mean, I do. Yeah, it means a lot.
Well, I think particularly now too, and we'll talk a little bit about retirement and how that kind of came into your life. But I think right now, especially, that feeling that you feel when you get some sort of validation from your students is something that a lot of teachers are lacking right now, because it must be the most insane time to be a teacher right now.
I can't even imagine. I really can't. I mean, on so many levels, you know. Mm-hmm. If you even took the pandemic out of the equation,
yep.
I still can't imagine. I mean, teachers They graduate from college with a target on their chest.
Yep.
Culturally and politically, teachers and schools have always been about the easiest thing to lay blame on.
Yeah.
Something doesn't go right. You know, schools are the closest thing that people have to feeling like they could directly influence.
Correct.
Like in a millage vote, or, you know, they can go to their school board and they know the people sitting behind that table,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know the people in Lansing or the people in DC, but in their local school board. So schools are, yeah, I don't know where it's going to go. I'm worried for the future of public education. That's for sure.
Well, I honestly, not to a doomist degree, but like, it's not even so much where it's going to go. It's where it's going right now. There are massive dropouts, like, or massive resignations of teachers who are just, and so obviously the people who don't understand, the opposite argument is, well, these teachers just don't get it. It's always been hard and they're dropping because they're cowards and whatever. It's like, no. They're not, first of all, when's the last time teachers' wages on average nationally went up? Like, the wages have stayed so stagnant, and the climate is just so hot right now.
Yeah.
It's got to be so stressful.
Yeah, I like I said, I don't know how they're doing it, and I suspect, yeah, I mean, they're dropping like flies.
Mm-hmm.
Emotionally and mentally, teachers are under attack, and I have a hard time picturing a lot of them finishing their careers in education.
Yeah,
because stress is just so high.
So obviously, the pandemic is a wild, out of the blue situation, but something that you, I guess, had some familiarity with was what was it like being a teacher on 9/11? I mean, what, like, is that I mean, of course it's memorable, but like, that was the last terrifying national situation.
It was very difficult. I remember exactly where I was when all that, just like, you know, it's sort of like when John F. Kennedy was shot. I remember, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I was in fourth grade and they sat us all down, and I flashed on that immediately when it happened, because I thought, okay, I have to help these kids understand something that I don't understand.
Right.
And not even understand it so much as like, how can I create this safe space? I mean, and that to me has been probably the most underlying tenet of my teaching career, at least, was when someone walked in my room, I wanted them to feel safe.
Yeah.
I wanted to feel that they were in a safe space, that they could become who they are, be who they are, become who they are. And so that was very challenging, because we were all just, well, it was similar to when the pandemic shutdown happened. I mean, it was like, there was many times I just felt like curling up in a fetal position
Right.
and just hoping it would go away. You know, so yeah, it's, those moments are tough. They're really.
I've heard other teachers describe that particular moment, obviously 9/11, being like, yeah, there was the initial terrifying shock that, like, are we going to get hit again? Like, is this going to happen around the country? But yeah, that exact conversation you described, where you have to sort of explain to the kids what's happening when you don't even really know yourself.
I mean, a lot of it, I think, is just like many things. The responsibility is not to explain too much, but to listen.
Yeah.
And just give them a space to say what they're feeling. And I mean, it's like when you have to deal with a death with kids, you know, of a classmate or a teacher or a parent or something, you know, just to listen, just to be there.
I'm sure that being a parent and a grandparent, of course, goes into that. There's some intuition, but there's some separation between how a teacher interacts with kids and how someone who's directly related by family interacts with kids. Yes, there's the comforting nature of like trying to make sure that your room is a safe space. But when you have sort of the opposite, when you have the quote problem child who's making it difficult for everyone to exist and to thrive, or if you have a bully, you know, how do you as an adult look at a kid and not have this you little shit attitude? Like, how do you see them for the struggles that they're dealing with at home?
Well, first of all, sometimes you do feel like you little shit.
Yeah, I
Uh,
imagine.
yeah, I mean, you do. It's just, it doesn't mean you write them off, but you sort of acknowledge you're
Hmm.
being a little shit right now.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm sure you said those exact words verbatim to my face.
well, it's possible. Um, you know, to me, I mean, one of the things I've heard kids say to me as adults now is that I was honest with them.
Oh yeah.
And I always, I didn't realize that till many years later. I mean, I did because I was honest with them, but I didn't realize to them how important that was.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean because you can be honest and not write them off. I mean, you
Sure.
can say, you little turd, you know, here's what you're doing and here's how it's impacting people. Um, and then you just hang in there with them. I'm the first to recognize, because I think that's the only way I can help move forward with someone is to try to recognize their struggles and the hurts that they've had. I mean,
Hmm.
it was many years into my career when instead of saying like, why'd you do that? You know, or what were you thinking? That I would just say, who hurt you? You know, and not looking for the who so much as what is the hurt that's causing you to do this? What is it? Because if we can recognize that, we can move forward. There's a chance of moving forward if you can recognize that, and if I can recognize that. Um,
I think that is almost exactly what I was talking about at the start too, is that like it really felt, and you know, as a kid, when you're in school, it's impossible to recognize that your teacher has some sort of empathy or to see your teacher as a human. At the time, they're just, you know, your boss before you have a boss, and you're just a drag on my day, and I just want to be here to fuck around with my friends.
right.
However, there's definitely some truth to that. When you walk into your classroom, it was a totally different space, and I know that it has a lot to do with the fact that it was not an extracurricular, but what's the phrase? It wasn't a, or is it an extracurricular?
Yeah, yeah, co-curricular.
Co-curricular or an elective.
It was an
It was
elective. You
an
know,
elective class. Just being in a space where it was like, okay, I have some sort of agency here. It allowed everyone in that room to feel like we were kind of equals, because like, yes, when you're in a classroom setting, there's like a natural competitiveness. Like you want to be the smart kid or you want to be the kid to get it first. But when in band, it's like I've got my little squad of percussionists over here, and we've got flute players and other wind instruments over here and brass over here. So you felt like you were seen there in a different way. And then by having someone at the top who kind of led the group with a level of empathy, that it's just like, this guy's not here to grade me. Like he's not here to judge my behavior in class. I get to have moments where I stand out. Yeah, you get to really flex your creative muscles in there. And if that class was taught by someone who just didn't care, you know, obviously there's a different outcome. If it's a curriculum thing where it's like, I just have to get the kids in and I have to teach them this part of the book, you can sense that as a kid, even when you're a kid, like this person doesn't care about me. They care about their job. And we could always sense that you cared about us. And that was huge for us, you know?
I hope so. Yeah, that. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think that is one of the most important things is the connection,
Mm-hmm.
and I've always felt that kids, they need to belong to something.
Yeah.
And whether it's band or sports or the photography club or whatever, they needed to feel like they were an important part of something. And band certainly can make that, is a good one to do that with, because
Mm-hmm.
they belong to the band, but they're the percussionists. They have a group within a group, you know, that they belong to. Yeah, and I mean, that's why I like to just stand at the door and greet everybody when they came in, so that I could get a sense of where they were that day. Was it a
Right.
good day, bad day? Were they going to need a little extra attention, or you know, some time to be recognized and acknowledged?
Sure.
And that's hard sometimes, especially in a large class like that. You know, you got
And
80, 90 kids in there. It's You know,
Right.
there are people I know that went through and maybe don't feel the way you did. You know, that I mean, I tried, but sometimes it's not easy to make that connection, and some put up a lot of walls for it. I mean, um, but yeah,
I have to imagine there's, at least upon reflection, there's some recognition in you though that like the ones you couldn't get to, there may have just ultimately been no getting to them, right?
well, sure. I mean, you know, you can only do what you can do,
Hmm.
and hopefully that your effort was honest and fully engaged as best you could at that time. And of course, you're dealing with your own, you know, you're coming in as a human every day with your own emotional baggage and
Sure.
mental and physical baggage, and you know what happened just before you left the house, or what happened, you know, down the hall a ways. um, but yeah, you just try to bring yourself as fully as you can, and be prepared to give yourself some forgiveness.
I imagine a healthy dose of forgiveness.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the effort has to be honest. If you've got the if you know, my wife and I often say we're responsible for the effort, not the outcome.
Yeah.
You know, if I put the effort in, I may not reach that kid, but I've done what I could, and maybe next time around I could try a different tact, or understand more about them, or taking more time. But if I put an honest effort in, I feel like, you know, for the most part, it's like I did what I could do.
And
Um,
I think there's an effort or an element of just that, you can control only what you can control or focus on only what you can control. And especially with kids, I hope that there's some sort of, yeah, like I said, healthy dose of forgiveness in that we all did at least age up. I was going to say we all grew up. Some of them have not grown up. Some people never grow up. But like, I imagine there's a majority of people, whether they liked you or not, can reflect and say, well, at least Frank was one of the good ones, like whether they hated school or not
right,
objectively. I don't think anybody saw you as the dick teacher.
right. I mean, I hope not.
Maybe I saw you as a couple of times, but
Yeah, that's possible, and
yeah.
that's honest. I mean, I appreciate that. I sometimes I saw myself as that.
Well, honestly, so I think it's fine to say the names as well because I'm actually good friends with one of them as well now. But I remember one of the most like, I don't know, we can call it badass things that you ever did was, or that I saw that you did, is I was
Uh-oh.
no, it was good. It was good. It was good.
Okay.
It was just sort of your like it's sort of me validating you saying that like you did literally everything that you could to make everyone feel safe in that class. In that, so it was the first year I had joined jazz band, which meant that it was the first year I didn't do football. Um, and there was an argument. I'll beep the names for the podcast, but again, we're all friendly with each other. It was me and we're all arguing about something in class before you had showed up. And when you had walked through the door, had said something to me, saying something along the lines of like, uh, I'm standing up for because he's my football buddy. And you walked through the door and said something along the lines of like, I know I'm only just picking up on this here, but you could be in football, you could be in baseball, you could be in whatever. Right now, you're in band class, and we work together as a class, as a group. Like there are no cliques in this class right now.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was kind of cool that like you didn't necessarily pick a side, but you said like, I don't care what little beef you guys have going on right now. It stops in here because we have more important things to
Yeah.
go through together as a group.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important. I mean, you know, especially in band. I mean, you've got leaders, you got people who sat and played third clarinet. Um, you got people who played every other note. You know, I mean,
Yep.
but they were part of this thing, and like I said earlier, everybody needs to be part to feel like an important cog, uh,
Yeah.
in the wheel. And so when we come in here, let's try to do that. Um,
Um, Speaking of cogs and machines, we're gonna take this a little bit linearly. We're gonna kind of back everything up, kind of the origin of how you even started becoming a teacher. But maybe you already know where I'm headed. I you have a fascinating story behind your abilities as a musicianship or as a musician, and it's that you do it with about 60% of your fingers.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
so cogs and machines. Could you kind of talk about? Well, first of all, for the video watchers, listeners, yeah, you got a couple of nubs there.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
What happened?
Well, it's kind of fascinating, and I think it's it's weird to say, but I think it's in some ways it's one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Oh, it's a character trait.
Well, it created some. I started playing piano. Music was important in my family. My dad belonged to the Columbia Record Club. We get a new LP every week, and I would sit down and there was always, he loved playing records, albums of all sorts. I grew up with Henry Mancini and Al Hirt, the trumpet player, and my brother played trumpet. He was a great inspiration to me. He's 6 years older than I am. And so I started playing piano when I was in second grade because I asked to. And then in fifth grade, I started playing the cornet. And we had in West Virginia, where I grew up, we had a very revered music program with one of the great directors in the whole East Coast. So it was something that, to aspire to there. And I moved to Michigan and continued. Band was the first place I made friends in middle school when I moved up here.
Oh, I didn't know you went to school up in Michigan.
Well, I grew up in West Virginia and I moved to Michigan, Cutlerville, actually.
Okay.
Which was a whole other, we could spend a whole hour talking about that. So I continued, I went to Kentwood schools. Mm-hmm. And when I was 16, I was still playing piano, pretty seriously. I was playing trumpet in the band. I had great band directors, and I had an accident with a lawnmower. My hand got pulled into the lawnmower, and was a mess. I was,
So a quick thing, sorry to interrupt. I think you're burying the lead here. How does the accident happen? Like, are you like working on it mechanically? Are you?
I was cutting the neighbor. I played tennis in high school. That was my one big sport. And I'd spent the day at a tennis tournament all day, came home early, was cutting the neighbor's grass. They had a bunch of kids, and there was some toys and parts of toys in the yard. There was a metal rod about that long that got caught in the chute. And this is back in the days when there was no protective plastic thing out there. The blade was a good 3 inches from the edge of the mower. I reached down to pull it out.
No.
Yeah, no. I reached down to pull it out. Unbeknownst to me, there was a hook on the other end of it, and it got caught on the blade, and my hand just shot in real quick. Yeah, it was not a clean cut. It was just a mess. My mother, my neighbor took me to my house with a towel. I just wrapped around it. And my mother, I had to get in the back seat because my mother had passed out at the sight of blood. And she drove me to the hospital, and they sewed it up. And there were two interesting things. One is my brother called me that night, and sorry about the accident. He said, but you can't get drafted now.
Hey,
which was the first thing.
The best thing that ever happened.
The first thing he said to me, he said, you only had to do one. And because it was in the middle of the draft and the war, and he knew all the medical exemptions to get out of it. And so we laugh about that. And then I called my piano teacher and I said, I'm not going to be able to take piano anymore. I was feeling sorry. And she was so great. She was an elderly woman, and the only time I ever heard her swear, she said, you get your ass over here. You're not quitting.
Sweet.
And so I would go over there with my hand all bandaged up, and for weeks, I'd just play right hand. And then as it started to heal, she would make me keep the rhythm on the keyboard, just tapping it. Cause every time you touched it, it was just like electric shock through your body. It hurt. Mm-hmm. but she was like, you got to start toughening that up. And she kept me going, and I kept playing. That was like I was 16. I auditioned at Michigan State for the band on trumpet and to be a piano major. I was accepted, but then when I got there, they saw my hand, and they really kind of, I was not a good student to begin with, a music student. I loved music and I wanted to play, but I felt like I wasn't supported with my hand. I would do my jury every year at the end of the year, and I'd pass, but then they'd sort of like, well, what do you think you're going to do with this? And I'd say, well, I hope I just keep getting better. I'm not going to be a performance major. But I didn't really know what I was going to be. I went into music school because I didn't know anything else. And that was just sort of like, oh, you're going to go into music, aren't you? And, well, yeah. And I got there, and I lasted 3 years in the music program at Michigan State. And at that same time, I was discovering a lot of other music, traditional music, folk music, whatever you want to call it. I always had played old jazz type stuff, Dixieland and 30s and 40s. In high school, I had a band. We had a big band, like a Glenn Miller band, with some guys from Forest Hills. Well, the first band I started with they were all in college, and I was 15.
Oh, hanging out with the big boys.
My buddy's brother was the drummer in it. And they were a really good band called the Royal Airs. And it was, the stands with the lights and the emblem on the front. And, it was a 15-piece band, 5 saxes, rhythm section, like the Glenn Miller, the old big bands.
Sure.
And so I learned that music there. And then they all graduated. They were going to Western, and they all graduated, and the band broke up. And I knew this guy, and we said, well, let's start our own band. We got all these gigs. They've got they basically played the country club circuit in Grand Rapids, which was big back then. Yep. They would pay for a 15-piece band, for their dances. So we played every weekend, at all the country clubs around Grand Rapids. And so we started our own band. We bought their book. They had probably 300 charts, original charts of, the Glenn Miller and all those Artie Shaw, all those big band charts. And we had our own band called the Formal Airs. And the drummer, his dad and grandpa owned a tuxedo rental and dry cleaner in Grand Rapids. Affendulis Tuxedo Rental and Dry Cleaner. And they had numerous businesses around town. So he outfitted us all in last year's tuxes.
Nice.
So we were a very formal looking band. We were all in high school. And we played that for years. And one of the coolest things, there was a guy that lived in Grand Rapids, worked at the post office, single guy, probably in his 60s, who used to play with Glenn Miller.
Oh, wow.
And so he came every Tuesday night. We rehearsed at my buddy's house and down in the basement. And he would come every Tuesday and work with us. And he was quite strict and not really fun, but he was really good. He knew this stuff, and he kept us in line and really taught us like the style, how to play this stuff. He never came to a gig to hear us, not once.
Just taught it and hands
off. He
off.
just came on Tuesday nights. It was his chance to come and try to impart what knowledge he had. Sid Stelma was his name. I'll always remember him.
That's cool.
And we kept that band going well into college. Probably the first 2 years of college, I was driving back and forth a lot of weekends to play gigs. But at that time too, it was about when I discovered, but got more interested in like folk music, traditional music, guitars, banjos, fiddles. Mm-hmm. I was learning to play upright bass at that point. And and I went in school, and East Lansing was quite a thriving acoustic music scene at the point that was just sort of exploding there. There was a music store that started Elderly Instruments, which was sort of the ground zero of it. And after 3 years in music school, I dropped out. I quit music school. I didn't see what I was going to do. I didn't want to be a band director. That was the last thing I wanted to be.
Interesting.
I was a music theory major. I was a music, a music therapy major for a while, just because I had to declare something.
Well, I actually
Uh,
want to pick up on that there actually, because you're starting to talk about how you're exploring other instruments as well. How do at what point did you feel I know we'll get to the teaching stuff, but at what point did you feel proficient enough throughout all major instruments to feel like you knew how to teach that? Is that a
that's a good
is
question.
that loaded?
Uh, Let me step back first.
Sure.
One thing, back to the hand thing,
Oh yeah.
and why I say it was probably, in retrospect, I can say how important it was. Is I tried to play guitar once when I was about 15. My brother had a guitar and he was playing. You know, he'd grown up Peter, Paul, and Mary and the Kingston Trio. We had all this stuff in the house, and I wanted to play guitar, and things came pretty quickly to me, but guitar didn't. It was just like I wasn't going to be good quick, and I realized it right away, and I quit. I gave it up. And when I was in college, about my third year, a buddy of mine said, "Come on," he says, "I'm doing this after school volunteering in these inner city schools in Lansing. Why don't you come and we'll come down. We just play with the kids and do stuff with them." And so I went with him. And at some point in that, when I was there, I went, man, if I knew like 3 chords on the guitar, we could sing like 1,000 songs.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that. And I like to sing, and I'd like to play music with kids. So in terms of learning something, when I was younger, I had this goal that was way out there, and that was to be good, to pick this up and be able to just play.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't happen because I wasn't very good on the rigor end of things, like the discipline and what it takes
Sure.
to get really good at something. It takes time and discipline
And passion.
and passion. I had the passion. I had the time. Discipline, not so much.
All right.
But when I wanted to play guitar with these kids, I moved that goal from way out there, like, to right here. 3 chords. Yeah. All I need is 3 chords. 3 chords and a capo, and I'm good. And so for me, in terms of moving that goal in closer, I could attain it. Yep. And then once I learned 3 chords, I bet I could learn another one.
Yep.
And pretty soon I'm not thinking about, I bet I can learn another one. I'm just learning another one. And it's we have the discussion here a lot. It's process versus product. I like the process of playing. I like the process of learning, and not as worried about the product. As long as I know my capabilities at the time and play within them, I can be good and not be like a great musician. I can do what needs to be done. I can see the musical scene, and go, I don't need to do a lot here to really contribute to this. I don't have to be a virtuosic player. I've never been. I'm a good musician because it's a total thing to me. I mean, I think I'll say I'm a good musician. Only I understand the big picture and how I can fit in, and because I want to fit in, I want to play, I want to interact. To me, music, for me, it's about playing with other people. It's about that conversation and the joy of it. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Well,
not,
just in particular though, like so of course you're going through this learning phase of, I can learn 3, maybe I can learn 4, maybe I can learn 5. But I'm also sensing something in your voice here that maybe I've never picked up on, in that, like, do you not necessarily see yourself as, like, it sounded like there was some hesitancy in you saying that you are a good musician.
Oh yeah. Oh, most definitely. I use the example. It's only been in the last 5 years that if someone says, "What do you do?" Musically, I'll say, "Well, I play this, and I'm a singer."
Interesting.
And that was, I mean, I honestly never said that until just the last few years when I finally owned it. And this is after people for years saying, I love your singing, or
Sure.
I could get a lot of affirmation for it, but I never felt like, no, I can't say I'm a singer. I know singers. I know really good singers, you know.
Whoa.
And it's the same. It's the same with all of it. I mean, yeah, it was hard for me to say I'm a good musician just
Frank,
then.
Frank, how old are you?
68.
And uh, there's no way that you could know this. I'm sure that if you listen to my conversation with Zach, that you heard it come up. But one of the running themes on this podcast so far has been a conversation centered around imposter syndrome. Are you familiar with the term?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
It's
No, I've lived my life feeling that way.
that is so, and of course this humanizes you on a totally other level, and of course again with this reverence that you have for someone when you're a kid and you grow up knowing
Right.
them as whatever. It's so you can't see past that. It's
I hate to burst your bubble here.
Are you human? Are you telling me you're capable of feeling
No,
emotions
I'm
too?
telling you, when I started teaching the band thing, I would tell people, I said, I'm teaching a bunch of kids to do things that I can't do.
Wow.
I mean, well, I can't play flute. I can't play sax. I could get a characteristic tone on them.
Yeah.
But to me, I felt like, okay, I have places to go to find out how to do this.
Mhm.
I have fingering charts. I have, you know, I could play music, but in college, I never had any of the pedagogy classes for clarinet, flute, you know, the low brass instruments, sax. I never had any of those. I took a string bass class one time just because I wanted to improve my own playing. You know,
So-
and I, like I said, I was no plans to be a band director in college. So you, and I felt like a real imposter. And when I came into band directors are a funny group. And I came into, you know, the local district of all the band directors and I felt it immediately. I'm an imposter. You people have spent your lives studying this, and I'm coming in and there were a few that recognized that and took me in and were really helpful, and many just kind of like kept me on the edge. You know, I was not one of them, and so it was real easy to feel an imposter syndrome. But
that's again maybe it's humbling to know that, because this podcast again is becoming some sort of space where just people can feel validated in their creative pursuits, whether that, you know, because I've had musicians on, I've had actors, I've had comic book artists, I've had just people across the spectrum. But again, the one constant has been all of us feel like frauds apparently. And
oh yeah, no.
some people are really
I'm
good at masking that.
Well, good at masking it, and it also is somewhat of a motivator. You know, I always laugh, not laugh. I've always had, when people say, "Oh, I was a good teacher," I never felt like I was a good teacher
Wow.
at some level, because I wasn't good at planning. I wasn't good at, you know, it was like more like, wow, there's something interesting. Let's put everything we're doing aside and let's just, because it's curious. I mean, I always say the most important thing to me was curiosity, and it still is. And if you're curious about something, I can help set the stage for you to learn about it, and I can help manipulate the environment and give you stimulus. But I might not be good at like making the test that makes sure you know all the facts of this or that, or the processes for math, or yeah.
I think one of the things that it goes underappreciated about that gig though was like where most teachers, let's say you were which we'll actually pick up on this, you taught before teaching band, correct? You taught a different, or was this just substitute?
I started, I'll tell you real briefly. I started teaching fourth grade in a Catholic school.
That's what it was.
And the funny thing was, I had the most non-conventional career probably there is. I can say that. My teaching certificate had lapsed because when I got out of college, I just wanted to play music. That's what I was doing, and I was making money doing it, living very cheaply. Moved up here to buy cattle, like Lake City, was living in a barn, and a friend of ours, a friend of my wife said, hey, there's an opening at St. Anne's, the Catholic school in town. They need a fourth grade teacher. And I went, oh, my certificate's lapsed. But I went in and hit it off with them. And they said, well, no problem. We're a Catholic school. We can hire you without, you'll need to get it brought up to date.
Well, pardon my ignorance. Do you need to be a Catholic to teach at a Catholic school?
No, I not at all. I was
going to say, I didn't sense the Catholicism running through your veins.
I didn't grow up Catholic. I grew up as a Presbyterian. But I hit it off with them. In fact, I just got a message from the principal that hired me yesterday.
No kidding.
Yeah, she lives, Sister Rita, one of the dearest people I've ever met. I could tell you story after story with her and I. But so I taught there in fourth grade for 7 years, and then financially realized I couldn't keep doing it because it was my first contract was for $8,000. So
whoa,
it was, and you could certainly, my wife was working, she was making
but
four times as much as me, but
yeah.
Then I moved to Lake City
right there, right there, that gap. Now, so at that time, rather than just teaching a specific curriculum, or rather than teaching band in general, you're teaching all of it. Except
they wouldn't let me, and I told them, I said, you don't want me teaching the religion.
It's probably for the best.
And so, and we laughed about it. I mean, they knew, they were very open about all this, and I was too. So Sister Rita Mary, who taught sixth grade, she and I would switch. She hated teaching math.
Okay.
And so she'd come and teach my religion class, and I would teach math. But
so was it just for the job of it that you're like, well, I do have some sort of education for this, I might as well just take the job? Or what like?
Well, I had a degree in elementary education.
Yeah, but
that's what I finished my degree in.
Why was it very clear to you then that, because you said that you had no inkling that you were going to be an educator, or was that just about band, or was that?
Well, it started out as band, and really in college, I didn't really know what I was going to do.
Who does?
Right. Who does? And fortunately, at that point, you could afford to take some classes to see what you liked.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always said the first 2 years of college ought to be just like a chance to take that sociology course, take that science course, take that phys ed course to see if something clicks. I liked psychology and sociology stuff. I considered, and then when I started working in that after school program with my friend, I said, I love working with kids, which I always did. I always knew that. And so I thought, I could be an elementary teacher. I like that. At the time, it seemed pretty free and open, pretty exploratory. There was a lot of progressive stuff going on in education at the time. Michigan State had some very progressive ed profs. So I took an extra year in the summer. It took me 5 years, a little over 5, to get my degree. And so, I got my elementary ed degree and started teaching and then I didn't use it for 8 years or so. I subbed, to make some, just when I needed some money, I was a regular sub at Waverly Schools, west of Lansing, but that allowed me to play music and pick and choose the days I worked doing that.
So when the Lake City gig opens up, how does your transition to that school work? Like,
well, like I said, I knew I needed to make some more money.
Yeah.
And we had a baby coming along. And so then our baby was born, and then I got the job. Our baby was born with severe physical condition.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the job, and within a month after getting the job, our baby passed away. And they just wrapped me up in their arms, wrapped us up in their arms. And it was just a very special time. I really connected. I still stay connected with those students, and that's 49. Many of them, they're late 40s and 50s
mm-hmm.
now. And so I love teaching there. It was so wonderful, but I needed to make more money. And I knew I had done some work in Lake City. I'd subbed there a few times. And Roger Moore was the principal, and I called him, and he said, "Man, we'd love to have you. We got an opening." And so I went out and got the fifth grade job. And so I taught fifth grade for 8 years there. So I spent the first half of my career teaching elementary, and that's all subjects. I mean,
was there a music educator there?
yes, there was. There was a longtime band director there for 30 years. And then there was a new person who'd come in, and they had, while I was just down the hall, because the band was right down the hall from the elementary, and the person tried to change too much too fast.
I see.
And was really struggling. It was, and she's great, and I still see her today, but she struggled and really got sick, and sort of dropped out of the scene. And there was nobody. There was a sub down there, a non-music sub in the band class. And I'd walk by every day, and it was just a disaster. And finally, I said to my principal or whoever, I said, bring the sub down to my class at the end of the day. I'll go down and at least get those kids playing. They need to be playing those instruments instead of throwing them around the room. I mean, it was, there was a pretty solid band program, and it was just going down the hill. When I took over, there was 30 some kids left in the high school band.
Wow.
Because they were just, and people were going, I'm paying money for an instrument, and there's nobody there to teach them, and they couldn't find anybody. So I started doing just the end of the day. I can wave my arms around and I did that. And then I said, well, how about at noon, bring them the sub down before lunch. I can go over to the middle school and get those kids playing. And
so this
just
is where
try to get them.
This is where the traveling to the different schools started.
Yeah, well, I had to go back and forth between, which was only, 3 blocks away.
Yeah.
And then I did that for like a month or so. And probably the end of November, they said, do you want to keep doing this? And at that point in my elementary career, what I saw coming down the pike in terms of testing and curriculum and GLICs and all these little checkpoints you had to check off were not in my wheelhouse at all. I mean, it was just not my strength.
You mean when the DeVos family started getting involved in Michigan education?
Well, I mean, we could go on. It's probably pre-DeVos. A Nation at Risk was a big report that came out, and so everything had to be data and quantified, and to me, my success as a teacher was teaching curiosity. Curriculum at that point was some book that we knew existed, and we thought it was in the principal's office up on the shelf. And the curriculum was the books that we had, the textbooks that we chose, and whatever you wanted to teach. I mean, it's like, okay, I would throw curriculum aside for weeks to do something that I thought was just like really cool.
Yeah.
And the kids were into, puppets. We made puppets. I was really big in puppets.
Which is cool. I do remember. Okay, I do remember this. You told a lot of. I just remember a lot of stories that you told about. This is why I remember you being an educator before, because you're always my band teacher. I didn't know anything about. I never had you as a teacher or whatever. But these are the types of things that you feel like, I don't know, you feel kind of part of the group when you're in your class too, because you would tell us these stories about how you got involved in education and how all these, like how your musical career started. Where other teachers, it's like, all right, everybody walk into class, open to page 39. We're gonna work on this.
Yeah, I was a lot less interested in trying to make sure everybody had the check marks next to whether they knew this or that.
Yeah.
Than if like they were curious and could get excited about learning. Because I've always felt like if you can get someone to be excited about learning, when they find out what excites them, get out of the way.
Yep.
Because most of the things any of us do are because we got interested in it at some point, and we started searching out who could teach us that, where are the resources to learn about this, what can I do, because this is really cool. And so, yeah, I mean, when I was teaching fifth grade, we did this whole puppet thing, like I said, and we'd spend weeks and the whole afternoon bringing in grandmoms and with their sewing machines and, you know, making these Muppet type puppets. I mean, they were quite extensive, you know, with foam and hot glue guns and burning ourselves. And,
Cool.
and then we would use them for the rest of the year, like all the time. You know, like if you had to answer a question in math, you know, you'd let your puppet answer because he could be wrong. You know, if he's wrong, oh, you stupid idiot. You know,
That's cool.
Why did you think that? I don't know. There was just something about it clicked. I got a message yesterday from someone that they're in their 40s now. They said, I still have my puppet.
Oh my gosh. I imagine I wouldn't get rid of that kind of thing.
Here's a funny story real quick about those. So I was standing in the Wesco once in the south end of Lake City going home. And a former student I had who was one of the scarier students that I liked.
That's a funny sentence there, alone. One of the scarier students that I liked.
I use that phrase quite often because there are people that are scary or they're ultra religious or whatever. I mean, I'll say, yeah, that's the most religious person I love. You know,
it's a qualifier
because I think you can. But anyway, so the door opens behind me, and it was a different setup in the store then. And I kind of turned around, and this person's got their hand all wrapped up in a blood-soaked rag, and immediately I'm thinking, oh no, I'm done. We're going to be robbed, or I mean, I was really scared.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just going, just pay, get your muffin and get out of here, Frank.
And this is when Wesco was that dingy little, like, tiny box. Okay. There's nowhere to run.
And he all of a sudden I hear, Mr. Youngman. And I turned, and of course it was a former student whose name I won't say. And I said, hey, and I said his name, and I said, man, what's going on? He said, well, I just got out of jail this morning and I got in a fight. And I mean, he just told this, but he immediately went, I still have my puppet.
I'm going to put it on to cover this wound.
Well, I'm thinking, yeah, your puppet's going to be bloodstained in a while. And in some ways I thought, well, that's not a success story.
Yeah.
You know, but it also made me realize, I mean, this particular person had never had a childhood, you know, and here he was as an adult and still clinging to those moments that gave him some little brief insight into being a child.
Yeah.
Because I knew his life story, and it was grim, and he never had a childhood. And I think for people like that, it's really important to be able to take them back to that and sort of bring them back through it again. You know, like to be a child, to be curious, to not be hurt, to feel safe. And you know, I don't know. That story's always stuck with me just because it was just so absurd.
Well, I think
he blurted it out. Here he's bleeding to death and just got out of jail. And the only thing he wants to tell me is he still has his puppet. But again,
of course, it's funny because of the puppet of it all. But there is some real truth to that. Like you know, whether, and I'm sorry if your capacity for accepting compliments isn't very high. I get very uneasy about it. But
that's all right. No,
I just mean in general that like that is probably a lot of people's stories with you in general. I know in particular that like, you know, for what it's worth, I love my parents and they're very supportive of me now. But growing up, I was bouncing back and forth every week between divorced parents' household, you know, and there's no stability there. And when your parents are fighting and arguing every week, it's like, I just want to go someplace where like I'm around my friends, where I feel accepted, where I'm doing something I care about. And when families are kind of fighting, there's not a lot of time for nurturing their kids. And you're dealing with kids. I mean, we pop into the band class at 5th grade. You know,
6th grade.
Yeah, we're kids finally starting to realize that there is a world around us. And we've got to just have 1 hour out of the day where we can just have fun and like, and again, nurture those passions. Because otherwise we're just kids going to work for 8 hours a day. And, you know, I believe in the value of public education. Obviously I believe that kids should be going to school for those 8 hours out of the day. But like, it shouldn't be all about ACT or LSAT scores or anything like that. It should be about growth and human development and human connection and
You know,
like having. I know that you said that music, you like enjoying it as like a conversation, that you like collaborating with people. But in that class, it was quite literally a conversation where the brass section would pop up here, then the drums would come up here, and then everybody would work together, which is actually kind of funny. One of the things that I still hold on to is when I'm counting, when I'm drumming, is I'm always counting my 1 e-anda, 2 e-anda, which was a thing that I'm sure all band or most band teachers introduced that as a concept. But you'd be so surprised how many people who are very talented musicians, but who never had formal training in school, learn completely differently. They're very self-taught. So counting isn't really a part of it. So it feels kind of cool in my late 20s to be explaining time signatures to people, or like helping them count and like, all right, it's on the and of 3, like helping them find that, like, because it's just stuff that we got to learn that we didn't really realize we were storing away for life. It was just like, it's just another class, but it's so different because it's creative rather than strictly educational. So I think you had a cool.
And it also, I think, the subdividing is what you're talking about, subdividing the beat.
Yes.
But when you can take something like that, the counting is so pedantic. It's so, okay, 1 e-anda, and I don't like, but it quickly transfers into the feel of it.
Yes.
And once you've internalized that feel of it, then you can count and figure it out when you need to. But most of the time, you've got this feel, this subdivision, well, that backbeat, all those things, and it doesn't have to be academic at that point.
And one of the fun ways to apply it though too is that, like, so I have always sort of existed. I believe that I am more talented at drumming than I am other musical explorations. I owe that a lot to your class, obviously, but it was the one that I was the most passionate about. I just did every single day.
Right.
But one of the sweet spots that I've been able to just kind of stick around is I really like playing punk music. It's just very fast. It's you can use the aggression, but also I have the formal jazz training or orchestral, like, doing a lot of offbeat stuff, coming in at only particular times. And it feels like it's a cool flair that I get to add to musical projects that feel otherwise like, because punk, for what it's worth, is pretty formulaic, or it's a formula. It all sounds the same. But when you
I'm not a punk expert.
Yeah.
There's some punk music I just absolutely love. And mostly it's the energy.
Exactly. It's the energy that, like, I love just being
there's
a part
an energy
of
to it. It's like, and it's not an energy that I like go to for solace or anything or an escape, but I can feel it and really appreciate it.
Yeah.
That people do, that's their escape.
Yeah.
Mine's in a different beat or feel, but it's, when I was growing up, I wasn't really big in rock and roll. And sometimes I would just say, I'm just not that angry.
Well, I wonder where you were because you were coming up during Beatlemania or post.
Oh yeah.
Like, was that relevant to you, or was it just like, it was just a thing that was happening peripherally?
It wasn't what I was listening to, other than that it was just prevalent.
Yeah.
I was listening to old 30s and 40s jazz and Dixieland and stuff. I mean, I was listening to all sorts of things, but, from, like I said, Henry Mancini to, George Gershwin, Cuban Overture. I mean, I love jazz influenced classical music. So yeah, I was definitely musically living outside of my era.
I actually have a little note about that, in that you seem like you were the counterculture. You were part of the counterculture movement, in that, the Beatles pop was like, it was the rebellion, it was the youthful rebellion. Everybody was having their
Right.
moment musically. And there was the acknowledgement is that there's two camps there. It's the people who love the Beatles and the people who hate the Beatles. And
Right.
but socially,
I love the Beatles. I wasn't, I mean, even then I did. I wasn't like a big Rolling Stones fan. Cream, those, Eric Clapton, those bands, I was familiar with them. We played bad arrangements of them in jazz band when I was in high school. They called it stage band then. But it wasn't until I got to college that I became more aware of, more in tune with what was happening at the time, Jethro Tull, or, it's like, okay, I like this. But also I had people that I lived with in the dorm, and then my friends we really got into old blues, Chicago blues, Lightning Hopkins, Buddy Guy, Muddy Waters, and we would go see them. They would come to East Lansing and like for a week, and we'd go like every night. I mean, and sit in the front row and so yeah, I've always been kind of out of sync with what's happening musically.
At this point during the podcast, I experienced some technical difficulties. I stepped away for a second to fix my camera, and Frank, always the entertainer, stepped in to save the day.
Give you a little musical interlude. So yeah, being in sync with your generation.
Yes.
For me, that's always been a challenge at some level.
Now,
the people my age that all grew up with Tom Petty.
Sure.
I never really listened to him. I did go to a Tom Petty concert once with Bob Dylan because a bunch of people up here went, and I said, yeah, I'll go see that.
All right.
I went to Jethro Tull concert on Michigan State one time. I loved it, but it was not something that I sought out. I was never a Deadhead. I'm not a jam band guy.
All right.
To me,
so now, to what degree did you, not to put you too much on the spot, but to what degree did you align yourself with the hippie culture? Like,
I never really liked the term. I always felt like I never self-identified as that. I was called that.
Yeah.
But I didn't like it because most of the time I thought it's
derogatory at the time, especially.
It had a derogatory, oh, you're aimless, But I was very much into the Back to the Land movement at the time, which was very hippie-ish.
Yeah.
So yeah, sustainability and things like that, being self-reliant. I was really into all those things.
Even if you apply it, sorry to keep interrupting, but if you apply it musically, I think there was this, because this is also the war on drugs eras as well, where like music itself is sort of its own counterculture movement. The fact that louder music was crossing the stage, or that just kids were getting more interested in aggressive anti-government or anti-authority music.
Well, music, it's always been at the front of most cultural revolutions.
Right, right.
If not the front, the instigator. Mm-hmm. It's a voice. You look at most periods of unrest, there's always a cohesiveness of music that brings people together during them. So yeah, it's. I don't think music follows, tags along. I think it's part of the first wave.
Sure.
And that you could say that throughout history. Back through the Romantic and Classical periods and things, there were always people that were pushing the boundary. So
Now,
yeah.
as I've gotten older, I've found that like I know what I like. I know the music I like to listen to. I do hear new artists from time to time, but I'll put on the same few albums, or listen to the same stuff throughout the week. Are there any artists in particular that have popped up over the last 5 to 10 years that you've been like, wow, this is something I'm probably going to engage with for a long time?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't search out new music very much,
Mhm.
which is bad.
It happens, though. Come
It
on.
just happens. I mean, I hear enough. Mostly, I see people at festivals, and because live music to me is sort of like what it's about. Um, I'll see people that'll just blow my mind.
Mhm.
There's a lot of great music, a lot of great singer songwriters that I love. Um, Many of them Michigan people. I mean, I follow the Michigan music scene pretty well, and I mean, we have a very special music scene here, um, of people your age, and mine. I mean, there's cross generation, which is very tight, and I think it's pretty unique in terms of places around the country. I mean, every place says, "Oh, we got a unique music scene," and they do. Michigan has a pretty special one, and I hear that from people around the country too. That says, "You guys got
Yeah.
something going on up there." I
It's
mean,
just the isolation of this place. We're surrounded by bodies of water. We're all
there's part of that I say because you don't pass through Michigan.
right.
If you come here, it was an intentional thing.
Yep.
I was reading an article this morning that just said, why so much great music came out of Detroit was because of the education system. Back in Motown days and stuff, they had an amazing music education program in the public schools. I know a number of people who were products of it. Jack White and my friend Dominic, who's Jack's bass player. Um,
You know
Ralph,
Jack White's bass player?
I do.
As in like White Stripes Jack White.
Yes,
No kidding.
Dominic. Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. No, I'll be having Christmas with him. Um, well, he married Rachel Davis, who lives in Cadillac.
It's just this is again sort of what I mean though, that like I don't think you realize that the like, oh yeah, it's just some dude I know, or just yeah, I had just this random experience. There are a lot of people who see that as like Frank Youngman is like
Well,
a rock star.
and no, see, and I don't feel that, and I don't hear it, and no, I truly don't feel that, and I'm glad I don't.
No, you shouldn't. You should not feel that.
I mean, it's just like,
That's
yeah,
where ego comes in. But
right, and I will say one of the greatest. I played in a band, the Lost World String Band, for 35 years, and we had a lot of success in terms of doing what we wanted to do, where we wanted to do it. We toured around and stuff, and there's clips on YouTube or something. And one of the best things I ever read on there, and I never go to it. Someone sent it to me. They said, "Here, look at this comment about your band." And I thought it was the highest compliment I've ever received as a band. As they said, "This is the most egoless band I've ever known."
great.
And I thought, I'll take that.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not to say, I mean, I've always said anybody who said there's no ego involved in it is not being honest.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I'm very, I recognize that. I mean, because most musicians just want affirmation.
I talk about that on every single episode. Like I try to approach with my guest that whatever we're talking about, like there needs to be a healthy amount or a healthy balance of like, yes, we're talking about this because we care about what we're talking about. This conversation is particularly relevant to other people, but I'm not going to lie and say I'm not a little bit narcissistic. I just want people to hear my voice.
Sure.
It's art.
And I think that's important to accept, as long as that's just not driving the bus.
Right.
I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, I think that's the insecurity that most musicians feel, and creates anxiety, is that they're worried they're going to be irrelevant someday.
Yeah.
I just want to remain relevant in some way, whether I'm teaching or playing or, supporting someone musically. Like when I play bass, I mean, my job is to make them feel good. It's not about me. I just want them to sound great. And if I can help them do that, then I've succeeded, and I feel really good about that. But no, there's always ego involved. I mean, it's
So unless teaching is not the answer, throughout all the musical adventures, endeavors, projects, groups, bands that you've been a part of, where do you think that you have felt the most personal validation? Like, where do you feel like this particular medium allowed you to express yourself the most?
That's a good, besides teaching. Well, a couple different bands that I played. The one band that I mentioned, the Lost World String Band. I mean, it was just a wonderfully engaging, creative outlet. That, I mean, we did some wacky stuff.
30
I mean,
years, you said, right?
Yeah, 35 years, I think. Some crazy things that were just, you know, to me, it's like when I go see music, I want to feel like what's done that I'm seeing is the only time it's been done, because it's happening now. Mm-hmm. And my energy in the audience is part of their performance. You know, it's not like they're up there trying to regurgitate note for note what they worked on Thursday night at rehearsal. Thursday night at rehearsal, they got the tune, they know what we're doing, and now let's go out and see what happens and what can happen that's totally unexpected, that just like, and someone who was there went, man, that happened tonight, and I feel part of something special because I know that didn't happen last week, and it's not going to happen next week. It was, you know, it's like a friend of mine, you know, used to say, he says, what goes down stays down. You know, whatever energy you get back, whatever thing you play off of, whether it's your bandmate or an audience, you put it out there, you respond, mm-hmm. and what goes down stays down. I mean, it's like no sorries, you know. It's what I felt at the time. I've got a band now that plays once a year.
I was just gonna. I'm so glad that you brought it up.
Called the Frank Youngman All-Stars.
Uh-huh.
And there's a couple rules in the band. And the first rule is if you ask when rehearsal is, you're out of the band.
Okay.
So, because it's a one-shot deal, it's one set we do every year at Harvest Gathering, and the other rule is no sorries. What goes down stays down. You're an all-star. You know, if someone does something, we try to respond. If wherever it goes, you know.
That is so directly tied the way that. Now, I have unfortunately never seen you play with that group live, although I want to pick up on this Harvest Gathering thing after this point, because I have a lot of friends who have seen you at Harvest. Under particular circumstances, I think it's easy to.
I have seen some of those people, but okay, this is the bridge we're crossing. That
yeah, we'll get there, but I just mean that attitude that you have about like no, listen, you're here, we play together, what happens happens. You brought that especially to jazz band class, let's kind of talk about that a little bit real fast, because I didn't necessarily bring it up when I wanted to. Jazz band class shouldn't have been called jazz band class. It was whatever.
I changed the name of it.
You're right. It was it wasn't experimental arts. It was
the Experimental Art Ensemble.
That's what it was. Okay.
Right. And I realized early on doing that because one year I had like 3 guitar players, mm-hmm. and we were doing like reggae stuff.
Yep.
And I thought, this isn't jazz, and that's okay. And it was so much more freeing. I mean, to me, when I took the band class, took over that was the least accountable thing I could be doing. You know, it's like no one's checking off to make sure I taught,
right.
You know, how to play these triplets. As long as I had butts in the seats, yep. I was doing the community service, and we were playing good music.
Yep.
You know, that we were in our concerts and stuff. We performed well and played well. I felt like they're going to leave me alone. You know, I'm going to be able to do what I can do, what I want to do. And so the jazz band, that's when I changed the name, the Experimental Art Ensemble, because every year it was a different ensemble of kids.
Was that a class while you were, or did it start with you as a teacher? The jazz band class?
No, I started it, I think. Yeah, cool. I don't think there was a jazz band before that.
Cool.
Not that I ever remember.
Well, yeah. Then, so to pick up on
I
that,
think
like,
I think the previous teacher had a choir class, I think.
oh, okay. Which I
Um,
think Lake City has again, correct? Or they had it
I,
for a minute.
they did. It comes and goes. I don't know what's going on now.
Mhm.
There might be. I don't know.
Yeah,
I actually taught it for a year, but I like singing, but I didn't like teaching choir. So
sure, I bet.
uh,
But that class in general, I will say, just for the audience sake, um, you can look up the cover. I think it's "Walk Off the Earth." I think that was the band. They did a cover of "Somebody I Used to Know" by Gautier, but all of the band does it on one guitar. So
did
one
that.
person's plucking here, one person's strumming
Oh
here,
yeah,
one person's holding the frets. And part of our jazz band performance was we did that.
we did it.
Like
No, I've got
as
pictures somewhere of
I would
yeah.
love to see those because that was
Alex, I
so
think Alex was
cool.
in that class, and Brendan, and
Yep.
uh,
And Ruth, Ethan, me,
yeah, Ruth. That's right.
was yeah, Ethan had to have been.
And that was great. I mean, we did that really well.
It was so cool. And like you just where are you gonna get the freedom to do something like
Yeah.
that? Other than Frank Youngman's jazz band class. Like
Well,
it just
yeah.
did,
To me, it was like because we never. I I decided early on we were going to come to that strictly through listening.
yeah,
You know,
and it was great.
we weren't going to like, okay, here we are. Let's look around. What instruments do we have? What kind of band can we be?
Mm-hmm.
Not like here's a bunch of music. Let's start playing this music.
Mm-hmm.
And we started listening to a lot of stuff and trying to figure out how we could what would fit our instrumentation. I think those were the years we were listening to a lot of Rico Rodriguez,
Rico Rodriguez, we did
the man from Waurika.
What is
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
What was the
Yeah,
yes. Yes. And then there was gosh, there was like a real swingy like I'm never gonna be.
That's all right. That's all right.
We did so many, but that experience alone, it diversifies your palette a lot too. It's like because everybody was able to bring in a little bit of their own flair, and even if we didn't perform it, you were always like, the first 5-10 minutes of class, it's like you'd walk in and we'd be riffing, like we'd just be like playing something, and then you'd come in and just riff with us, like. You'd be coming from the middle school over to the jazz band class.
Right.
So for the first 5-10 minutes, we were just alone waiting for.
Oh, I know. No, it was crazy, but I trusted you, and the school trusted you, and they knew that's how that schedule worked. And you guys were always doing something when I came in, and sometimes you were just talking, because something had happened or people were feeling a certain way. And I always loved that. Sometimes I just come in and sit down with you and we'd just talk.
Yes. I remember so many band classes where you would hop in, or jazz band class, you would hop in to just either a heavy conversation or just a conversation in general. And yes, although if we look at it technically, we should have then stopped, let's go to class.
Yeah.
But it was never like, all right, class, open to book, whatever, or open to page, whatever. It was, what do we all feel today, and how can we turn that into something we do together?
Right.
And now the together can be, let's make music together, let's learn something together, or it can be, let's just talk and figure this out.
Right.
And I just, again, that is so important to kids at such a fundamentally formative time in their life.
And that was important to me. There was times I felt guilty, like, oh, geez, we should be doing. And then I would think, no, and there was a specialness about that because it was a smaller class. Our accountability was very low in terms of all we needed to do was play 2 or 3 tunes at a concert, and that's 2 months away. Yep. So let's just keep doing what we're doing. Let's talk, let's play, let's listen, let's get bigger ears so we can hear what we're, listen to things differently. Mm-hmm. Listening. And I think a lot of it, learning how to listen to music differently translates to learning how to listen to people differently.
Yes.
I think there's a really high correlation there because, you're learning to listen. And so many of us are only listening so we can respond instead of listening to hear where David Mund is today.
Right.
So no, I love that class. I have some of my fondest memories there. I'll I'll shoot you some pictures sometime.
Please do.
Yeah.
And so one of the hardest things that I'm learning about this podcast so far is that it's hard for me to figure out how to end it. So there's of course a phase out, but because you get it, I think it's important to have a conversation built around how you decided that it was time to retire, or maybe if it's less personal in that, there can be some extenuating personal circumstances around it. It could be a lot to do with the school. I'm sure a lot of things. But my more framed question is, how, once you've decided that this era is over, do you proceed? Like, how do you then, after you've made the decision that I'm done with this, how do you find your next thing?
That wasn't really hard for me. In terms of deciding when to, I was just getting tired. It's just physically a demanding job. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting older, and it's like, I have a lot of interests. There's a lot of things I want to do, or, like to do. I keep bees. I do, woodworking, make sound gardens, I mean, I'm still curious enough that if I say something, phenomenal
long exposure photography. Let's not.
Yeah, right. I mean, I want to be able to go out at midnight and do these goofy photography things.
I love them.
And I realized, that the one mistake we all make is that we think we have time. Mm-hmm. They'll be there forever. Well, no, it's not. It's I'm aging, and I wanted to spend more time with my family. I wanted to spend more time doing things I wanted to do. I wanted to just get up and sit and quietly read for a while in the morning instead of, I'm not a morning person. So when I retired, it was easy. I mean, I got a million jobs here. It's hard for me to settle myself. Mm-hmm. So it's like, as soon as I'm done with you, I'm probably going to go out and cut some wood. I built a sauna last year because I love saunas. Cool. I wasn't worried. And some people I see where, because they've tied everything into this. I wanted to play more music. I still teach, teach at camps. I've had some private students on Zoom type of teaching for a while.
Okay.
Yeah. So little time, so much to do, and I thought I gave this 35 years. That's a good run. I mean, the hesitancy was just financially, whether am I going to be able to make it? Because
I bet
that first 8 years in the Catholic school didn't help me any. I got no retirement in that. So, and finally my wife one day, I came home and she said, we can do this. I've been crunching numbers and I think we can do it, and I said, well, I'll keep working. So I'll have some income coming in. And it was hard. I remember the last year, how hard it was to tell kids, I'm done. I felt they all respected it, but it was really hard for me because I felt like I was abandoning them. I felt a responsibility, and I mean, especially younger ones, kids who had just signed up for band. And I'll tell you this real quickly, and this is kind of ties back to that ego thing in an interesting way. When I took over this job, I called a buddy of mine who was a band director. I hadn't talked to him in 20 some years, but we went to music school together, and he had risen to the top of the band world in Michigan. I mean, he was like one of the big band directors in Michigan. Great guy. I still keep in touch with him. I called him and I said, Mike, I said, you'll never guess what I'm doing. I said, they just asked me to be the band director here. And I got no clue what to do, really. I mean, I can make music and I think I can learn this. I mean, I was really ignorant and naive in terms of how little I knew in terms of that gig. And he said, well, yeah, there's things you're going to, you have to do this and you have to learn the repertoire. He said, but the most important advice he gave me was this, and his name was Mike Kaufman, and I'll say it, it's fine. He taught in Grand Ledge, and he said, kids don't sign up for band in Grand Ledge. He said they sign up for Mike Kaufman.
Hmm.
And he says that's not an ego thing. He said, but when you got a kid in 5th or 6th grade and they're going to decide whether they're going to sign up for band, they're looking at someone that they've seen around school, that they've heard from other kids, and they're going to sign up for 7 years with this person. And if the person's a dick, you know, they're not going to sign up.
Right.
You know, so it's not like they're signing up for me, but they are. I mean, because they're buying into like what you're putting out there. You know, it's
But
like
the
and
proof
I
is that
came
they
in
quit.
I came in the middle of the year, so that was different. But by the next year, it was like, okay, and those words ring in my mind a lot. You know, when I see band directors struggling or teachers struggling, it gets back to that connection. If you don't have a connection in a relationship, nobody wants to be there.
Right.
You know, and so I always remember that advice, and it really hung with me. It's like how important my relationship is with every student there. Do they want to enter into this relationship with me? You know, I mean, I can say, oh, it's about the band, and it is, but you know, do I want to hang out with this guy or not for 7 years?
One of the things that Zach and I talked about on our episode, which I think you said that you listened to it, right?
I did. I listened to the whole thing. I loved it. I have to say, I loved it. I grinned the whole time.
The one of the things that we were trying to remember was, are you the one who's sitting with kids to test out their instruments, like in 5th grade?
I did some years, and some years I didn't. Marshall used to come down and do it.
Okay, so it was Marshall.
Yeah, it was Marshall. I did a few years in the middle there, but then and some years I did it with the Marshall rep. I kind of helped him, but no, for the most part, they did it.
I think I have this visceral memory. Now, maybe it's just me making it up in my brain, or maybe it is true, but I have this visceral memory of you sitting across from me, like seeing if I can tap things out.
Right, and that may have been the years when I did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we just couldn't remember who was doing what.
No, I think I may have done it in a few years in the middle, but.
So my last question, now that we've run the gambit of your teaching, your college, your performance, and your retirement.
Oh, we got so much more we could talk about, David. We
and
do it again.
For real, yes, I would absolutely love to have you back. I am sort of annoyed with myself for pre-establishing this, like, it can't be longer than an hour and a half. So it could be. I just want it to be palatable for a wide audience, and people get bored after a while.
We've been going at it for a while.
Yeah. So I guess my last question. All the things aside, that of course you still have this life to live. There are things that you want to do, but do you feel like you have accomplished the things in your life that would make you feel as though you are fulfilled?
It's a good question. The word accomplished doesn't really resonate with me.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not going to say, well, I've accomplished that. I've done that, or I engaged in that. And did I do it with all the right reasons and an open heart and the right intentions? I can definitely, I mean, if I heard that I was going to die tomorrow, and I had 24 hours to reflect, I'd feel good about it. I mean, not about dying, of course. Sure. But no, I think I lived that life pretty fully. I feel good about having connected with people, that I've been honest and loving. And I think I can say that I've been joyous. I've been curious. I've let other people in my curiosity. I've engaged in other people's curiosity. I mean, I'll follow someone down a rabbit hole, of something that they want to do, just because the relationship, if it connects with them. So no, I like I said, the word accomplished, I've engaged in life, I think, in a way that I can feel good about. I mean, I don't, we could always go with regrets. Oh, I wish I'd have been more present in that time or whatever. But all in all, no, I'm living fully as I can.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, no.
Frank, I love you to death, and I miss you
David,
so much.
I have to say, I love you to death too, and it's been so wonderful to see you through school and after school. And I don't see you all that much. I followed, when you went to New York and came back, and various things you've tried, and I think I told you one time when you were struggling in school, you're really brilliant. I mean, you really have a brilliant mind, a big heart, and you were struggling. And I said, David, you're not stupid. You're just lazy.
First of all, I remember you saying that verbatim, and it was so true.
and it was true. And I don't think you were lazy, because you're a really hard worker, but you were distracted. I mean, it came across as laziness.
Yeah.
It's like, you're just not doing the work, David, and there's not much else I can say about that. I love you. Then I loved you. I loved you now. Love you now. But there was things getting in the way of your curiosity, and it felt like my job is like, first of all, because at the time I think you were feeling, I'm just stupid. Because you were getting those messages all the time. Your grades weren't good. Your parents were, wonderful folks, but they're harping on you. Yep. Different people are harping on you. You're not meeting someone's expectations, and I think that's one of the challenges. I just wanted to help you get that stuff out of the way so you could meet your own expectations and do the work you needed to. I mean, you work hard, man. I mean, it's like, and you're creative, and you're curious. And I think you've gotten a lot of the things that were in the way out of the way.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're still there, and we all have those struggles, but you're not letting them stop you.
Sure.
And I so appreciated you doing this and asking me, and I just hope you keep doing it. And
for a little feather in the cap or cherry on the top, just those two truths are fundamentally related to each other. That I have grown significantly, that I can recognize in myself. And there were a lot of these things that held me back. And I mean, this podcast is quite literally the A.D.H.Deep-Dive. So the distractive nature of what I was like as a kid is no surprise to see that it's come full circle into podcast. However, that truth collides with, it would not have been possible had I not had a teacher or a friend who cared for me on such a personal level as much as you did. So I really do love you, and I appreciate everything that you've done for me. And I do want to have you back. And maybe, even though we didn't talk about the crazy new age hippies who trip their balls off and watch you at Harvest Gathering, maybe one day I'll see that band live, and I'll get to see you on stage again.
Yeah, next year.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you, buddy.
I will send you some teasers whenever they're cut. But for now, I'm gonna cut the podcast, and I'll be in touch with you soon, buddy.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
See ya.